Assalamu alaikum everybody, how are you? Today inshallah we start in chapter 16, trigonometric functions. This video by the way is for grade 11, not for grade 12. Yes, we're going to talk first about the graphs of trigonometric functions like sine, cosine, and then later we're going to talk about tan. You'll find these graphs on the textbook into page 261 and 262. First graph which is given to you now is sine theta. As you see, this is graph of sine theta. We can write y equals to sine theta. How did you get this curve or this graph easily? By replacing some of the known angles. So the angles, as you see now, this axis is representing the x values or theta values, and this is the y values or the y axis. By replacing 0 first, starting with the 0 degrees, sine of 0 is equal to 0, sine of 90 is equal to 1, sine of 180 is 0, and so on. And you do the same thing for the negative values. Once you plot these points, then you can join the points together to make this curve. So as you see, it's like wave, up, down, and so on. As you see, we have two values. The maximum value always for the sine theta, for the graph of sine theta, is 1, and the minimum value is negative 1. And here is a very important note. The graph repeats. So basically you'll find this note for both, for the cosine theta and for the sine theta. The graph repeats every 360 degrees, or you remember that when we did in semester 1, converting from degrees to radian, you're supposed to multiply the angle by pi over 180. So converting 360 to radian, you know that pi itself is only 180, so double of pi, which is double of 180, will give you 360. So the graph repeats every 360. See, if you start from negative 360, so the graph is going up, then start to move down, then stop at the 0, then start from the 0 again and go up, then goes down, and then go, and so on. Okay, so negative 360 to 0, this is the period. Negative 360 to 0 is 360 degrees, then 0 to 360 is equal to 360, which means if you're going to continue the curve so on the x-axis, the next point that you reach to once you make one full wave is 720. And the same idea in the negative, you'll find negative 720 and so on. Graph of the cosine, graph of the cosine is the same as graph of the sine. So we're going to plot the values, angles. For example, cosine of 90 is 0, cosine of 0 is 1, cosine of 180 is negative 1, cosine of 270 is 0, and cosine of 360 is 1. And you do the same thing for the negative. You can use the calculator. These are the angles at radian, by the way. If you want to use them in radian, it's up to you. You'll find the same values. But remember to change the calculator mode into radian. Change it from D to R. D is degree and R is radian. Again, the maximum value is 1 and the minimum value is negative 1. Maximum here is 1 and minimum is negative 1. So sine and cosine are much close to each other. They are the same. Now, the very important point that I want you to know it is the word periodic. Sine theta and cosine theta are periodic, which means they're repeating itself every 360 degrees or 2 pi radian. Do you see that? I think these two graphs are so clear. Now for the tan theta, this is the graph of tan theta. Y equals to tan theta. So you place some angles. Tan of 90 is undefined, it's math error. 270 as well, negative 90 as well, and negative 270. 360, negative 360, negative 180, 180 and 360, all of these angles equal to 0. Okay, so these will be the graphs. By the way, these lines, these dot lines, we call them, based on what we did in chapter 7, we call them asymptote. So we have infinity number of asymptote for tan theta. And it's coming always in multiples of 90. See, negative 270, negative 90, 90, 270, and so on. The periodic of tan theta is 180 degrees. So sine and cosine, the periodic of both of them is 360 or 2 pi radian. But for the tan, only tan is 180 or pi in radian. This is the graph of tan theta. Once we start into page 256, we're going to talk about something which we call the sign of any trigonometric ratio, which means how you're going to state the sign of these three ratios on the graph or in the circle, unit circle. Basically, this is the unit circle which has 4 quadrants. This is quadrant 1 starting from 0 to 90. This is quadrant 2 starting from 90 to 180. Third quadrant from 180 to 270, and fourth quadrant from 270 to 360. What I'm writing here in the circles, letters A, S, T, C, which means each letter stands for something. A for all the ratios, and I'm talking about the ratios, I'm talking about sine, cosine, and tan. So all these ratios on the first quadrant, they're having a positive sign, which means if you do any angle from 0 to 90, not to 90, between 0 and 90, I'm sorry, not from 0 to 90, any angle between 0 and 90, and you do sine or cosine or tan of any one of the angles between 0 and 90, you'll find them with a positive sign, and you can try it by yourself. Even in the radian, by the way, because you know that 90 degrees in radian is pi over 2. Any angle between 90 and 180, only sine ratio which has the positive. What about the cosine and the tan? Both of them, they will have negative sign. So you can write here cosine, negative, tan, negative. When you move to third quadrant, you'll find only tan which has the positive. What about sine and cosine? Sine has a negative and cosine has negative. And when you move to the fourth quadrant, you'll find only cosine, any angle between 270 and 360. Here, any angle between 180 and 270. Okay, these are the limits or the boundary of each quadrant. From 270 to 360, any angle between these two angles, you'll find cosine has positive, but for sine and tan, you'll have negative signs. I think it's so clear. What about these expressions that I wrote them in black color? In the first quadrant, the ratio or the expression that we're supposed to use it in the first quadrant is theta. In the second quadrant, the ratio or the expression is 180 minus theta. Why? Because all the angles here less than 180 and more than 90, so you do 180 minus theta. Because when you move from 0 to 180, you make half turn. Okay? From 0 to 180, you do half turn. So, for example, if you move to here and you stop in a specific angle and you want to find the rest to reach to 180, so you do 180 minus the angle that you did. We're going to do that later, inshallah. On the third quadrant, it's 180 plus theta, as you see, because it's more than 180. And any angle on the fourth quadrant, the expression that you're supposed to work with is 360 minus theta. Here we go again. As you see in this quadrant or this graph, it's the same of the graph that we did from few minutes. See, from 0, negative 90, so this is basically negative angle. Clockwise direction will give you negative angle, and clockwise, anti-clockwise direction will give you positive, as we did in the previous one. So 0, negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, and negative 360. Starting with the fourth quadrant, negative theta. Third is theta minus 180. Second is negative theta minus 180. And fourth is theta minus 360. And all the letters, the signs of all the ratios staying the same. There is no change at all in the signs of the ratios on the quadrants, whatever a positive range or the negative. So this is basically, we called it negative range. And what you have in the previous, we called it positive range. So you have to use this statement to make it easier to understand or to memorize the signs of the ratios. All students to college. All semi Tom's cat. All silly Tom's cat. All students to college. All students to college. Okay? Expressions as you have now, this is for the negative range. Now let's talk about another point. There you find these two on the last page before the exercise, special triangles. You have all these three angles, 30, 45, and 60. These angles, we call them special angles. Why? Because you can get the answers in fractions or the third form. I mean in accurate values, but the rest of the angles on the first quadrant within 0 to 90, they don't have accurate ratios. They're having decimals. You can try it by yourself. 30, 45, and 60. And by the way, these angles, they're having their multiples and the rest of the quadrants. You can find it in the second, in the third, fourth, and so on, in every single turn. And remember, when I'm saying turn, each turn, one turn, is equal to 360 degrees. Good. Now this triangle is just to show you how we get the ratios of these angles. This triangle has hypotenuse as 2, base 1, and the height root of 3. Remember the Pythagoras hypotenuse, squaring of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squaring of the other two sides. But this is not the point that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the ratios. This is angle 30, 90 degrees, 60, and these are the sides. I want you to know that how to get these ratios from this triangle. But at the end, you're going to use the calculator. No need to memorize this. You have the calculator. Sine 30, which is opposite over hypotenuse, is equal to 1 over 2. Cosine is equal adjacent over a over h, adjacent over hypotenuse, root of 3 over 2. And tan is 1 over root of 3, or root of 3 over 3, which is opposite over adjacent. For the sine 60, now for 60, this is not the adjacent, it's the opposite. So that's right, I write it in green color. So this is opposite for the 60 and this is adjacent for 60. That one is opposite for 30 and root of 3 is adjacent of 30. Okay, so sine 60 is equal to root of 3 over 2. Cosine 60 is half and tan 60 is root of 3. You can memorize this, or even I told you can use the calculator, but you can do these ratios by yourself. 45, two equal sides. So what do you call this triangle? We call it isosceles triangle, two equal sides. And this is the base of the triangle. This is the hypotenuse of the triangle, which is root of 2. Sine 45 and cosine 45 are equal to each other because opposite and adjacent are equal to each other. So sine 45 is 1 over root of 2 or root of 2 over 2. Sorry. And tan 45 is equal to 1. Okay guys, now this note, it's very important note, which is talking about period of any sine n theta, sine of a multiple of any angle, and cosine of a multiple of any angle, graphs, is 360 over n or 2 pi over n, because 360 and 2 pi are the same. For example, this question is asking for the period of sine 2 theta plus 45 is, so you're looking for the multiple, which is given to you now is 2, this is n. Then you divide 360, which is the period or the periodicity of sine and cosine, which is 360 degrees or 2 pi in radian, divided by 2 by the multiple. So the period will be 180 degrees or pi in radian. Same idea with the cosine. Period of cosine of 1 over 3 theta plus pi over 2 is 360 over 1 over 3 or 2 pi over 1 over 3. So 360 divided 1 over 3 in the calculator, or you can move the 3 up, 3 goes up. So 3 times 360 is 1080, or in radian is 6 pi. Now one more important point, like what we did in sine and cosine. Now, this is for tan. The periodicity of tan and theta is 180 over n, or pi over n. For example, tan 4 theta is 180 over 4, because this is the multiple. N is 4. So 180 divided 4 is equal to 45, or pi over 4 radian. Now let's do exercise 16b. Solving exercise 16b in the textbook, page 266. What the question said, express in terms of the trigonometric ratios of acute angles. So remember, all the angles in the first quadrant are acute angles. If you just back to the graph that we did in the previous video, you're going to see that in the first quadrant, all the angles between 0 and 90 are acute angles. All the angles between 90 and 180, we call them obtuse. And all the angles between 180 and 360, we call them reflex angles. Now, 170, based on the quadrants, 170 lying on the second quadrant. So you know A, S, T, C. You can say it as ASTIC or all students to college. S means the second quadrant has the positive only for the sine, but for the tan and cosine in the second quadrant, the angles or the ratios of these angles which lying in the second quadrant, they having negative sign, they are negative. Now 170, the expression in the second quadrant is 180 minus theta. In the first is theta. In the third, 180 plus theta. And in the fourth, 360 minus theta. So theta is the angle which lying in the first quadrant, which we called it reference angle. What we called it reference angle on the first quadrant. 170, which is in the second quadrant, if you want to get the reference angle which lying in the first, we're supposed to use 180 minus theta. So you do 170 equals to 180 minus theta to get the angle in the first, which is theta. So what you're supposed to do, you're going to interchange the terms. So theta equals to 180 minus 170, which is equal to 10 degrees. So now 10 is an acute angle which lying in the first quadrant. Now my question is, what is the sign of sine in the second quadrant? It's positive. So sine of 170 equals to sine of 10. And you can try that using the calculator. If you get the sine 10 and by comparing the sine of 170, you'll find exactly the same answer. Now tan of 300. 300 in the third quadrant. Remember the range. I will show you the range. 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. 300, it's in the fourth quadrant, which is more than 270. Expressions are theta, 180 minus theta, 180 plus theta, and 360 minus theta. Now 300, it's supposed to be in the fourth quadrant, so 360 degrees minus theta is equal to 300. By interchanging the terms, it's exactly as we did before. So theta is equal to 360 minus 300, which is equal to 60 degrees, which means the equivalent angle of 300 in the first quadrant is 60. But the point is, what is the sign of 10 in the fourth quadrant? ASTIC, ASTC. So in the fourth quadrant, only cosine will take the positive. What about the tan in the fourth quadrant? So it's supposed to take a negative sign. So tan of 300 is equal to negative tan of 60. Good. Now for cosine of 200, 200, it's in the second quadrant. No, it's not in the second, because 200 is more than 180. So it's supposed to be in the third quadrant. So the expression is 180 plus theta equals to 200. By interchanging the terms, you can move 180 to the other side. So theta is 200 minus 180, which is equal to 20 degrees. So the equivalent angle in the first quadrant, which is the same as 200, is 20 But what is the sign of cosine in the third quadrant? The sign of cosine in the third quadrant is negative because tan will take positive. So cosine of 200 is equal to negative cosine of 20. And you can check that easily using the calculator. Negative 50. Now we're supposed to use the negative quadrants or the negative range. 0, negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, and negative 360. Okay, so negative 50, it's in the fourth quadrant. Negative 50 is in the fourth quadrant because it's between 0 and negative 90. So negative 50 in this quadrant, the only ratio which takes the positive is cosine. A, S, T, C. What about the sine? So sine will take the negative because it's in the fourth quadrant. Remember, the fourth quadrant is cosine only positive. In the first quadrant, all the ratios are positive, which means sine, cosine, and tan. In the second, only sine, and in the third, only tan. So sine will take negative. Negative 50 is here. And what's the expression? It's negative theta. Remember, the expression is negative theta. Theta minus 180, negative theta minus 180, and theta minus 360. So negative theta, which means negative theta equals to negative 50, negative cancel negative, and theta is 50. Now 50 is an acute angle. So sine of negative 50 is equal to negative sine of 50 degrees. And you can use the calculator to make sure you answer right or wrong. Same idea, tan of negative 140. These are the quadrants: negative 140, 0, negative 90, negative 180. So negative 140 is on the third quadrant. This is negative 270, negative 360, A, S, T, and C. Negative theta on the fourth quadrant, theta minus 180 on the third. So you do theta minus 180 equals to negative of 140. Then move negative 180 to the other side. So theta equals to negative 140 plus 180. Then theta is equal to 40. So the reference angle or the equivalent angle to negative 140, which lying in the first quadrant, is 40, because 40 is acute angle. What is the sign of tan in this quadrant? It's positive. So tan of negative 140 is equal to positive of tan 40. And you can check that easily. Does tan negative 140 is the same as tan 40. I'm going to show you now on the calculator, but we have to change the calculator mode into degrees. Now, tan of 40 is equal to this value, 0.8390999, and tan of negative 140 is the same, exactly the same answer. See, 0.83909963. Sine of negative 230. Negative 230 is on the second quadrant. It's here. Because the range is 0, negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, and negative 360. Then, negative 230 is on the second quadrant, A, S, T, C. Alhamdulillah, sign is positive on the second, so that means that sign will take the positive. What is the expression in the second quadrant? On the negative range is negative theta minus 180. So negative theta minus 180 equals to negative 230. Now let's move negative 230 to the left side and negative theta to the right side. So positive 230 minus 180 equals to theta. Then theta is equal to 50 degrees. Now 50 is the acute angle, which is equivalent to negative 230. What is the sign of sine in the second quadrant? It's positive. So sine of negative 230 is equal to positive sine of 50. Now, sine of 1000, exactly. Sometimes I'll give you some of the angles which is out of the range, which is more than 360. So what you have to do, you have to back to the range or the equivalent range from 0 to 360 or from negative 360 to 0. 1000 is more than one turn. So what you're supposed to do, so you do theta equals to 1000 minus 360, because one turn is equal to 360 degrees. You have to back to the previous and the beginning of this video. One turn is equal to 360. 1000 minus 360 is equal to 640. So still outside the range. So we're supposed to subtract 360 more. So minus 360, which is equal to 280. Now 280 is on the range. In which quadrant you have the 280? 280 in the positive range because it's positive angle. 0, 90, 180, 270 and 360. 280 is here in the fourth quadrant because it's more than 270. Now A, S, T, C. Now you have to back to the first quadrant. What is the expression? It's 360 minus theta. So 360 minus theta equals to 280. Now interchange the terms. Theta is equal to 360 minus 280, which is equal to 80 degrees. 80 is an acute angle. What is the sign of sine in the fourth quadrant? It's supposed to take a negative sign. Why? Because cosine only has the positive sign in the fourth quadrant. So sine of 1000 is equal to sine of 280 is equal to negative sine of 80 degrees. And you can check that using the calculator. Now this question on the same exercise, the question asks you, using the special triangles, which means one of the angles of 30, 45 and 60, write down the values of cosine of 135. Yes, 135. In which quadrant? 135 is on the second quadrant. You have to memorize these, it's very important. So it's on the second quadrant from 90 to 180, and the expression is 180 minus theta. So 180 minus theta is equal to 135. Then theta equals to 180 minus 135, which is equal to 45. So the equivalent angle in the first quadrant, which is the same as 135, is 45. What is the sign of cosine in the second quadrant? In the second quadrant, only sine will take positive. So cosine of 135 is equal to negative cosine of 45. Then we know that cosine 45 using the calculator is equal to root of 2 over 2. So negative root of 2 over 2. See, sometimes this question is coming in this form. They might ask you to find the values of these angles without using the calculator. But you said that we have to use the calculator. Yes, I said that, but you have to do that only on the last step. The meaning of this question, if the question asks you to never use the calculator, is don't give the final answer directly. So you have to show the working out. As we did now cosine 135 is not equal negative root of 2 over 2 directly using the calculator. But you have to show all of these steps to reach to here. Now you get full mark. Sine 330, خلاص, you know that. We still in the fourth quadrant. Expression is 360 minus theta. And sine of sine in the fourth quadrant is negative because cosine will take positive. So you do 360 degrees minus theta equals to 330. By interchanging the terms, 360 minus 330, then theta is equal to 30. So easily sine of 330 is equal to negative sine of 30. We know that negative sine 30 is equal, or sine 30 is equal to half, which means the answer is negative half. And you can try that using the calculator. 300 is on the fourth quadrant. Same idea of 330. It's in the fourth quadrant, 300 degrees. Expression is 360 minus theta equals to 330. So by interchanging the terms, it's 300. So theta is equal to 360 minus 300. So theta is equal to 60. So the equivalent angle of 300, which lying in the fourth quadrant, is 60. So 60 in the first quadrant. What are the sign of tan? Remember, it's cosine only, so tan will take negative. So tan of 300 is equal to negative tan of 60. By the way, tan 60 is equal to root of 3, so the answer is negative root of 3. Now, let's continue the same question. Tan of negative 150. Negative 150 is on the negative range. Negative 150 is from negative 90 to negative 180. Expression here is theta minus 180. So we do theta minus 180 is equal to negative 150. We're going to change the terms, swap the terms. Theta equals to, or you can just move negative 180 to the other side. So negative 150 plus 180. So theta is 30. The equivalent angle to negative 150 on the first quadrant is 30 degrees. What are the sign of tan in this quadrant? Tan has positive sign. So tan of negative 150 is equal to tan of 30, and tan 30 is root of 3 over 3. Now 405 is out of the range, so you're supposed to subtract one full term first, as we did in one of the questions before. So 400 minus 360 is equal to 45. Now we reach to the first quadrant. Now what is the expression of the first quadrant? It's theta. So 0 to 90, theta. So sine of 405 is equal to sine of 45, which is equal to root of 2 over 2. 660. So theta equals to 660 minus 360. You will get 300. Now you got on the range now. You reach to the range. So 300 is on the third quadrant from 270 to 360. Sign on this in the fourth quadrant is negative because cosine here is positive. So what you're supposed to do, sine of 660 is equal to negative of sine of 300. But still 300 is not the acute angle. So you're supposed to subtract it from 360. What is the expression here? It's 360 minus theta. So you do 360 minus theta equals to 300, which means theta is 360 minus 300 equals to 60. So sine 660 is equal to negative sine of 300 is equal to negative sine of 60. What's the value of the sine 60? It's negative root of 3 over 2. Write down, this is question 4, write down the values of these, leaving surds. So surds means root. On the answers were appropriate. So sine, basically it's exactly the same idea we did before. 2 pi over 3 but you have to work in radian. See, this is 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Expressions, theta, pi minus theta, pi plus theta. So remember, pi is 180, yeah? 2 pi minus theta. So what are you supposed to do? You have to make sure that 2 pi over 3 is including in this range. So easily we can convert it to radian first. You just multiply it by 180 over pi. So 180 divided 3 is equal to 60, and 60 times 2 is 120. So we know that 120 is in the second quadrant. So we're supposed to use this expression. So pi minus theta is equal to 2 pi over 3 by interchanging the terms. Pi minus 2 pi over 3 equals to theta, and theta is equal to pi over 3. Pi over 3 lying on the second quadrant. So pi over 3 in degrees is 60. So theta is equal to pi over 3, and the sign of the second quadrant, sign of the second quadrant is positive. So you do sine 2 pi over 3 equals to sine of pi over 3, which is equal to root of 3 over 2. Now here you can use the calculator. See, the surd is coming here. Sometimes you can get the root and sometimes you cannot. You just find it in a whole number or fraction, accurate fraction. Same idea, 11 pi over 6. So you just convert it to radian, to degrees, sorry. 180 divided 6 is equal to 30, and 30 times 11, 30 times 11 is equal to 330. So we're talking about 330. 330 is in the fourth quadrant. So the expression is 360 minus theta, and this quadrant only cosine will take positive. Okay. So what we have to do, we have to use 360 or 2 pi minus theta. So 2 pi minus theta is equal to 11 pi over 6. By interchanging the terms, 2 pi minus 11 pi over 6 is equal to theta. You can use the calculator into this case. So you'll find that 6 by 2 is 12, and 12 minus 11 is equal to 1. So it's pi over 6. Now pi over 6 in degrees is 30. So sign of cosine in this quadrant is positive. So alhamdulillah, it's positive. Cosine of 11 pi over 6 is equal to positive cosine of pi over 6, which is equal to cosine 30 is equal to root of 3 over 2. Thank you.